Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Julian, and I'm the director for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support here at Illinois State University. And I'm excited to be talking to you today about Universal Design for Learning and the CTE classroom. You should be able to post in the question box there on your screen, and I'm hoping that you can see my full display. Let me make sure that is what you're seeing. Not quite yet here. Okay, that you should be able to see my screen now. So good afternoon, everyone. Hope we're all doing well. And I just want to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about myself first. So we're with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. We are a grant-funded entity out of the Illinois State Board of Education. And this is a 4-part series on Universal Design for Learning in the CTE classroom. And this webinar today is part 1. So we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction. And what I'd like to know from you is, what do you teach? Post that in the question box there, or if you have a chat pane, it depends on which application you're using. If you are on the app, you have both a chat pane and a question box. If you are on your PC, then you have just the question. But I'd like to know what you teach, and then how well do you know UDL? 1 would be not at all, 2 would be somewhat, 3 would be I've had a training or 2, and 4 would be I could write a book on it. So if you can post there in the question box how well you know UDL, so I can kind of get a sense of who's in my audience today. Thank you. We've got a couple 2s coming in, so some familiarity with UDL. Excellent. So as you're going through there, and a couple more 2s, excellent. So we have somewhat of a familiarity, and that's exactly where we want you all to be today. So what I'd like to show you is that the definition for universal design. So as we moved into Perkins and as we moved through the Higher Education Act, UDL has been talked about. It's been talked about since Perkins 4, and it's really been looked at in a way that we're kind of examining what UDL is. There are several books on universal design, and we're really going to be taking a lot of the work from CAST and also what Higher Ed and Perkins have said. So universal design for learning, the term means a scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practices that A, provides flexibility in the way information is presented, in the way students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the way students are engaged. So we're going to talk a lot about those 3 aspects of UDL today. We've also in previous series talked about UDL is B, it reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodation, support, and challenges, and maintains high achievement exceptions for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is the fact that UDL, though it's a great practice to assist those students who possibly have a barrier, it also is just a great practice for all students. So what we're talking about is our learning environment. And here are some things that we're doing for you that I want you to think about. I don't know how many of you are remote. I don't know how many of you are teaching hybrid, and I don't know how many of you are doing in-class instruction. And so we're going to cover all of those different realms, whether it be in-class instruction, whether it be in a hybrid format, or whether it be completely virtual. But in our environment today, what I'd like you to kind of think about is, what are the things that you have that really embed universal design? So you're able to self-regulate. So you can sit anywhere you want to be sitting. You could be standing, you could be walking around, you could be having a nice afternoon snack. It is about 2:30. So you could be eating, you could be fidgeting. I'm a fidgeter, so I'm sitting here spinning back and forth in my chair, or you could be tapping your foot. So you're able to self-regulate. And though the online platform does give a lot of variability for that, we also want to look at what we can do within our classroom. So we'll talk about that later. Other thing is the ACT. So what are the ways in which you can engage with me and I can engage with you? So we have the agenda that we'll get to in just a second. You have that chat box or that question box that you're able to look at. You can raise your hand. So as I look at you, you have that opportunity in GoToWebinar to raise your hand. And then you can also doodle. So maybe you're one of those people who like to take notes and have it pinned to paper. So you can take those notes and have those for later. And then that perceived or perception of our learning environment. We are on a screen, we're sharing slides. I will be sharing a personal copy of my slides, and we could be doing closed captioning. And I should have turned that on, and I don't know if I can at this point. So we'll think about that for your students as well. So our goal for this session today is really to explore the foundation of universal design for learning, and we're going to do that quite quickly. What I want to point you to if you're a novice at UDL is there was a series that we did back in May. We brought in the Center for Assistive Technology, and they did a full session on Introduction to UDL, and that was CAST, who was our national experts when it comes to universal design for learning. And then we're going to also, so if you haven't checked that out, be sure you check that out. It's on our website. I'll show you that as we wrap up today. And then explore the concepts and implications for variability that impact teaching and learning. And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about variability and what that means. So UDL Core Concepts. We have UDL in the architecture, UDL in neuroscience, and then UDL in learning. And those are the three big areas for where we really engage with universal design. And when we talk about architecture, we talk about all those things in your environment that you encounter that come with universal design. And for a lot of people, that's where it stops. That's where they have that, okay, well, I know what UDL is because I'm going to have a flexible seating in my classroom, or I'm going to allow for things within the architecture or the setup. If you have walked into a grocery store lately and the door is open for you, that's universal design. If you get into your car and the car, your seat moves forward, your steering wheel moves, all those things that accommodate you, that's universal design. So that's universal design in architecture. The neuroscience is really that idea of how the brain works, the how, the what, and looking at how the brain works, and that's the neuroscience part. And then the learning part is what we're going to look at today and through this series on that application of universal design. So we're going to talk today about engagement in practices, so sustained effort and persistence, and engagement in practices, optimizing value and authenticity. So the idea of engagement, the idea of how not only things exist, but also how we engage with our students. One of the UDL core concepts that I really want you to take away from today is the idea that the barrier is in the environment, not the learner. And I want to say that just again real quick. The barrier is in the environment, not the learner. There have been many conversations with many teachers over many years, or many parents over many years, or many bosses, administrators, pick a person, saying that there's something wrong with a student. And what UDL does is ask us to challenge that notion of, is there something wrong with a student? Let's look at what barriers they encounter in the environment. Is there a hearing impairment? Is there a fact that they need glasses? Is there something that they need an accommodation? So UDL really pushes us to look at the barrier being the environment, not the learner. And most importantly, UDL is not a checklist. So you're not going to walk away after this 4-part series or after today with this whole, I'm going to do A, B, and C, and woohoo, I have UDL. That's not how it works. What it is a lens about thinking about everything that you do. So how can you move through your world in a way that really embraces more diversity and makes you more open for accessibility for students? So one of the things that I want to really showcase here is the idea that neuroscience now tells us that variability is the norm. And so as we're looking at history, and we used to say, okay, you know, we have the brain of the normal student is this, and the brain of the abnormal, or if there's some kind of impairment, the brain is different. But what we have found with the advancement of science is that neuroscience now tells us variability is the norm. There is no normal science. There's no normal child. There is no average child. And so when we design things on the average, it really is in detriment to the way in which we are designing all items. So we want to be sure that we're allowing for variability in our instruction, in our assessments, in our engagement with our students, and just embracing that variability is the norm. I will tell you, I've been doing universal design professional development all this summer, and of course my children have been home, and my son went back to school this fall, and he has a new instructor. She's right out of college and fantastic and doing an outstanding job. But she said, okay, so for all of you, for the average student, we're going to do this. And of course, my son, being the very engaged child that he is, he raises his hand. He's like, nope, variability is the norm. None of us are average. We're all unique and different. And she, of course, let me know that. And he, of course, let me know that, because it was just, he was very proud of himself for saying, yeah, you know what, Mom, I've been listening to you in your room going through this stuff. So it was pretty exciting for him. But she's like, oh, so he's been listening to you. And I was like, yeah, that's where that comes from. So I'm going to share a video with you now. And there's a couple things that we're going to talk about with the myth of average. So we're also going to look at it in a UDL setting. So we're going to watch it together. If you are really engaged with it and want to learn more about what we're talking about, there is UDL Learning the Brain, which is an independent reading for you, or Learning Variability is the Rule, Not the Exception. And one of the things that I'm demonstrating here for you is that idea of having an engagement within the class that you do together, but then also allowing students, if they wish to dive a little deeper into some other areas. So that's something that UDL really talks about, and that's something that we can easily do in our classroom, saying, okay, this is a lesson, but if you want to learn more about this particular subject or more about where we're going into these things, we can do that. And I see that, you know, we have people who are in college level welding and accounting and mechatronics, which is fantastic. How do we really assist our students in diving deeper in those areas that we want to? So gonna see if this magic works, and if not, we'll go from there. It's always a hold your breath moment when we have a video starting. Okay, give me one more second. I'm gonna try one more thing. There we go. And please post in the chat if you're not able to hear this. I know this is always fun when we're showing a video. Is everybody able to hear? Imagine you're a fighter pilot. You're operating a machine that in some cases can travel faster than the speed of sound, and where issues between success and failure, sometimes life and death, can be measured in split seconds. If you're a fighter pilot, you know that your performance depends fundamentally on the fit between you and your cockpit. Because after all, what good is the best technology in the world
So the issue is, how do you design one cockpit that fit the most people? For a long time, it was assumed that you could do this by designing for the average pilot. That almost seems intuitively right. If you design something that fit for the average size person, wouldn't it fit most people? It seems right, but it's actually wrong. And 60 years ago, an Air Force researcher, Gilbert Daniels, proved to the world just how wrong this really is and what it was costing us. Here's how he did it. He studied over 4,000 pilots, and he measured them on 10 dimensions of size. And he asked a very simple question. How many of these pilots are average on all 10 dimensions? The assumption was that most of them would be. You know how many really were? 0. Gilbert Daniels proved there was no such thing as an average pilot. Instead, what he found was that every single pilot had what we call a jagged size profile, right? It means no one's at the same on every dimension. And this makes sense. Just because you're the tallest person doesn't mean you're the heaviest. Doesn't mean you have the broadest shoulders or the longest torso. But this is tricky because if every pilot has a jagged size profile, you design a cockpit on average. Literally designed it for nobody. So the Air Force realized they had a problem. And their response was bold. They banned the average. Meaning that moving forward, they refused to buy fighter jets where the cockpit was designed for an average sized pilot. Instead, they demanded that the companies who built these planes design them to the edges of dimensions of size. Meaning that rather than design for, say, the average height, they wanted the cockpit that could accommodate as close to the shortest pilot and the tallest pilot as the technology would allow. Now, the companies that made these planes, as you could imagine, weren't happy. Right? They argued and lobbied, and they said it's going to be impossible, or at least impossibly expensive, to build a flexible cockpit. But once they realized that the Air Force wasn't going to budge, suddenly it was possible, and it turned out it wasn't that expensive. And in fact, they made great strides, leveraging simple solutions that we all take for granted in our everyday life, like adjustable seats. And as a result, the Air Force not only improved the performance of the pilots that they already had, but they dramatically expanded their talent pool. Today, we have the most diverse pool of fighter pilots ever. But here's the thing. Many of our top pilots would have never fit in a cockpit designed on average. So most of us have never sat in the cockpit of a $150 million fighter jet. But we've all sat in the classroom. And I would argue that these are the cockpits of our economy. And I think we all know that we have some problems. We're spending more money than ever before, but we're getting worse results. Whether we're talking about declining test scores in math and science, or our dropout crisis. You probably know that we have over 1.2 million dropouts every single year in high school in this country. What you may not know is that at least 4% of those dropouts are known to be intellectually gifted. It means we're losing over 50,000 of our brightest minds every single year. So we know we have a problem. But do we know why? So far, we've been content to blame the students. We blame the teachers. We even blame the parents. But here's the thing. I think back to the Air Force example, and I can't help but wonder how much of this problem is just bad design. Here's what I mean. Even though we have one of the most diverse countries in the history of the world, and even though it's the 21st century, we still design our learning environments like textbooks for the average student. No kidding. We call it age appropriate, and we think it's good enough. But of course it's not. I mean, think about it. What does it even mean to design for an average student? Because a student is not one-dimensional, like struggling to gifted. Students vary on many dimensions of learning, just like they vary on dimensions of size. Here are a few obvious ones. And just like size, each student, every single one of them, has a jagged learning profile. Meaning they have strengths, they're average at some things, and they have weaknesses. We all do. Even geniuses have weaknesses. But if the fighter pilot example has taught us anything, it's this. If you design those learning environments on average, odds are you designed them for nobody. So no wonder we have a problem. We've created learning environments that, because they are designed on average, cannot possibly do what we expected them to do, which is nurture individual potential. But think about what that really costs us. Because every single student has a jagged learning profile, it means that the average hurts everyone, even our best and brightest. Even for them, designing on average destroys talent in at least two ways. First, it makes your talent.
Okay, we're going to stop the video there for a second. And we're going to come back to the PowerPoint. So again, feel free to post in the question box there what you thought of that session or that particular conversation there. And then I want to see what I've got going on in your question box. And so then I want to kind of move forward with the idea of variability. So we talked about if we design for the average, we design for no one. So what does that look like? And I'd like to start with a little dinner analogy. So let's think about this for a second, understanding variability in a dinner party analogy. So after this lovely pandemic is all over, I'm going to invite you all out to my house because we're a small little group here today and I think it'd just be fun. And as you all come out to my house, I like hosting parties. I'm going to make you this for dinner. This is a nice Mexican lasagna. And as we're getting on to the 3 o'clock hour, I mean, maybe some of you are a little hungry. I don't know if you had time for lunch or not, but this is what I'm going to make. And so if I make this for all 15 of us or so, or 9 of us here for dinner, are there any things like this is what we're serving? Are there any things that I'm not taking into account? Go ahead and post those in the chat or in the question box there. Is there anything, any of you who would not find this appealing? I mean, I don't know if you find it looks good or doesn't look good, or if this is something that you would eat or not eat. But I know for my house, I have a child who doesn't like beans. So the fact that there's beans in there, and then if I were to serve this for a dinner party, I have quite a few friends who are vegetarian or vegan. So when you're looking at that Mexican lasagna, it looks good, but it's a gluten issue. Thank you, thank you. So when you're looking at the dinner party and you're looking at planning for individuals, you're saying, okay, am I accounting for the gluten-free, the lactose and intolerant? I am allergic to milk, so that's not lactose, but it does have a weird effect on making me deaf. And then vegetarian, so there was ground beef in there. Do we want that? So with a dinner party, it's not a one size fits all, right? And so possibly it's better to have a dinner party that looks more like this, which is a proactive menu where everyone can really get what they need. Everyone can you can still have a dinner party, you can still have a Mexican theme, but then everyone gets what they need so they can make what they want out of it. And the reason why I talk about this is because it's important to look at your dinner party also as your curriculum. You might have some students who respond better to test taking. I went to high school with a wonderful individual, and she could take a test and ace it no matter what. Homework, horrible. Presentations, didn't like them. Never did projects, but testing, she did amazing. And she found herself in a very successful career in the military where there is a very standardized test for everything, and she has been hugely successful. She was more of a D for diploma kind of student in high school, and I'm sure you're thinking of a student in your own encounters that you might align with that. So what we want to do is make sure that we're having something for everybody in our curriculum the same way we want something for everybody in our dinner party. And I want to be clear that choice is not the same as variety. So if I invite you over and let's say this is my dinner schedule. So if you come on a Monday, we're having spaghetti. If you come on Tuesday, we're having vegetable soup. You come on Wednesday, we're having salad. Thursday is taco. Friday is pizza night. And that is my house. That's if you're coming, this is what you get. And again, this is not the same as variety. It's just choice. Do you see what I'm saying? So let's say you are a vegetarian, or let's say you have a cheese intolerance like I do. I'm not going to be able to eat at my own house on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, but Tuesday I'm good to go. If you have, maybe there's meat sauce there on Monday. So things that you want to think about to be sure that we have variance and we're proactive in our planning. So variability is very contextual. And the good folks at CAST have told us that there are 4 different ways in which we approach things. So you could be a north, which is you like to take action, you try new things, you plunge in, woohoo. You're an east, you like to look at the big picture and the possibilities before acting, kind of weighing your yays and nays there. Or maybe you're a south person, you like to consider everyone's feelings and hear all voices before having an opinion or taking an action. And then there are also those of us who are West people who like to know the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and then they will take an action. So CAST has divided variability into these 4 quadrants. And what's important to note is that depending on where you are, depends on how you respond. So for example, scenario 1, you're in a grocery store, shopping market that you know really well. All right, we all have our favorite shopping markets. You know where to go through, you know what is. Do you north, plunge in, east, look at the big picture, south, consider feelings, or west, pay attention? Go ahead and throw those in the question box. Where would you go? What kind of person are you in a grocery market? All right, thank you. We got a couple norths with us. So let's look at north and east. All right, perfect. Let's look at another scenario. Scenario 2, you're planning a party for your best friend's birthday. Are you a north? Do you plunge right in? Are you an east? Do you look at the big picture? Are you a south? Do you consider feelings? Or are you a west? Do you pay attention to details? This is an important one to also remember that you go into context. So please answer in the question box there. But I want you to also think about this. Pre-COVID, I was definitely an east when it came to party planning. Look at the big picture. What do I need? Get my grocery list. Who am I going to invite? All that good stuff. Now, in the era of COVID, there's a lot of south that comes into my party planning because I need to consider if I invite my parents, if I invite someone who has a pre-existing condition, can I have so many people there? Is someone's feelings going to be hurt? What is going to happen? There's a lot of things that change your dynamics. So the reason we're going through these scenarios is so that you understand that where you fit in that variability does change by circumstance. So I'm going to guess some of you have noticed that, like maybe you were a north in the grocery store, but when it comes to party planning, I'm seeing a lot of east people in the party planning. They're looking at that big picture. So one last scenario for us today. Scenario 3, You're on a committee that's deciding which curriculum to purchase. Do you plunge right in, look at the big picture, consider feelings, or pay attention to the details? Okay. And now you can just raise your hand, but by show of hands, how many of you were the same consistent variable through all of those? And how many, and just raise your hand if you were consistent through every single one. If 1, 2, 3, you always approached it the same way. I see no hands up. Oh, I do see a hand up. All right. Thank you, Ellen. So of the group today, one person approached every situation the same way. But again, many of us kind of change depending on the situation. And it just depends on how you are and how you want to handle things. But your students are going to be the same way. So the UDL core concept is that variability is the norm. Okay? Variability is something we always have to be thinking about. None of our students are all created equal. I have 2 children, same mom, same dad, same genetic makeup, right? So they should just operate the same way? Absolutely not. Variability is the norm. So learner variability is a term we use to describe all students who enter the classroom and bring with them unique constellations of abilities, experiences that matter when it comes to learning. It's lovely that we've labeled it, but we've known this for a while. Learning variability is our student body. We've talked about it in the context over the years of teach to the student, meet students where they are, differential instruction, all of these great things. And UDL really embraces all of that and talks about it in learner variability. So learner variability is the term to describe all students who enter the classroom and bring with them a unique constellation of abilities, experiences that all impact what happens when it comes to learning. So there was a scholar that back when I was on the other side of the desk that we talked about cultural frame of reference and how everything, Joel Spring, and everything that they bring to the table infuses your cultural frame of reference. Learning variability is impacted by cultural frame of reference. All the things that make you who you are and make you the wonderful and fantastic teacher that you are impact the way in which you learn for learner variability, but also impacts the way in which you teach. So if you're like me, and I will say I'm guilty of this, I spend my life doing professional development and teaching. And so if I'm in a classroom or at a presentation with a poor instructor, I tend to tune out, and I'm guilty of that. And it's just because of who I am and what I've done. So it's okay. I'm going to, if any of you have fallen in that category, it's okay too. So UDL Course Concept, we can design for variability. Whew, right? You're all sitting there thinking, okay, I've got a class full of 25, 30 students. You're telling me they're all unique and different. Fantastic, I know that. How do I plan my curriculum, right? So you can just design for variability because variability is predictable. In learning, it can be designed for. Dun, 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 fantastic, right? We're excited. So UDL and the learning brain. So just a little overview here. There is no average brain. Check, we've got that, right? There is no average brain. The brain has incredible plasticity and can be changed and manipulated and taught, i.e., we can learn. And goals drive the nervous system. So we have strategic networks, the how, affective networks, the why, the recognition networks, and the what. And again, if we want to dive a little bit deeper in these, we will be over the next 3 webinars following this one. But really today, we're just going to kind of go on the top with the how, the why, and the what, and really looking at how we learn. So you engage your strategic network with what you're going to learn, what you see in your classroom. What am I going to learn today? So today I'm going to learn how to history of the world. And then affective network, the why. Why are we learning this? Why is it important? The recognition network is the what. So I recognize that I have some background in this. I might have covered this before. So how do I bring it forward? Also understand that some people need accommodations. You can't see me right now, but I have glasses on. That's an accommodation, pretty much the most common accommodation for our populace. And it is because I'm old now and I need glasses to see. So that impacts the way in which I interact with my strategic, my how, my why, my what, because if I don't have that accommodation, there are barriers to my success. Again, not saying that I can't see, but the barrier is the environment that I cannot engage with unless I have my accommodation. Pretty exciting, huh? So, what variables or variability do you see in your classroom? How can you plan for variability? Is there anything that you can think of that you're doing within variability within your classroom? Go ahead and post those in the question box. Some of you are saying, no, Amy, I'm here to learn about variability. And others are saying, okay, I'm going to write this down. Provide content in various formats. Thank you, Cynthia. Excellent. So yeah, that is one. Let's go look at some other ones here. So variability that you can see in your classroom. Modify assessments. So one of the things we like to discuss with instructors as they're going out and looking at implementing universal design is, do you have a set assessment? The term I like to use is back in the day, but anyway, when I was young, we would have a culminating test. At the end of the semester, we would all take a test, and that would be like 50% of your grade. That's really not great UDL practice. That's actually bad UDL practice. Modifying assessments and allowing students to show progress throughout the semester so they're able to see as they generate the grade, but also having the grade not be just on one test is a form of universal design. I'm going to guess that several of you have been doing that for a while. You might not have named it universal design, but yes, having students have portions of their grade made up of presentations, tests, projects, labs, things like that are ways that you're looking at variability and having variability in your classroom. In addition to that, ways in which you allow students to engage. So if you have a student who's a really great hands-on student and they can solve anything hands-on, but they might not understand it as well if they read it out of a book, be sure that you're looking at variability in your instruction and in their testing for understanding. But we'll get there in a second. Variability in seating. Now, depending on how you're teaching right now, there's all kinds of fun ways to do that. So if you're in your classroom, there is the idea of flexible seating. So having the students sit on either those wonderful exercise balls so they can bounce out their energy, or maybe have them in bean bags so they can relax while they read, or having them in different settings. Now, I will say the individual who is in the welding lab, that's phenomenal, but you know as well as I do, you don't want a bouncing chair in a welding lab. That's just a recipe for destruction. So what you do want to think about is that you already have variability in your seating, because I'm going to guess you're not teaching your full class in your lab. You're teaching your class in your classroom and then moving into your lab. And so CTE is really, again, where we're seeing the root of this within the laws. As I said, it was Perkins, and for those of you who don't know, Perkins is the federal law which funds and supports career and technical education across the country. And so you see universal design being infused in schools through Perkins, through CTE, because CTE really does embrace and embody universal design in a lot of different ways. So variability in seating, you have variability in instruction. So what are some things that you can do for variability in instruction? You can share your notes. There's a university that has embraced universal design across the board. So every instructor shares out notes for their classes for their students. Instead of just having that as a special accommodation for a particular student in your class, if they're assigned in that class, everybody gets the notes. In addition, syllabus is something that, again, might be more of a college level, but that idea of what are the plans. One of the things that we have really embraced, or I'm seeing really embraced as we move to online learning, is planning out what the week looks like, planning out what those assignments look like, and giving those to the students in the beginning of the week, in the beginning of the year, in the beginning of the month, however you're looking at it. And so that's something that you can do to really talk about variability in instruction, including handouts. So not only talking about a theory, but demonstrating a theory. You can do that in a remote environment as well. So using those whiteboards, recording yourself. Trust me, I'm not somebody who loves being on camera all the time, but the same idea of being able to demonstrate something hands-on is really important, whether it be in person, you all know that from your labs, or looking at that in the instruction through engagement with students on a remote level. So looking at variance in delivery of instruction. Anything else, any other ideas that you all have? Go ahead and post those in the question box. Absolutely, dissemination of information, making sure that we're sharing things out. Great idea, great idea. Using technology, yes, excellent. Kahoot, yes. Polling, active polling in online classes is a nice way to do universal design. You're checking for understanding, you're making it engaging. Fantastic, fantastic. You guys are awesome. Use of technology can be used in a variety of ways. So looking at PowerPoint, looking at ways to show what you're doing, looking at ways to check for understanding. Flip chart has been a wonderful, fun assessment for our students to really be able to demonstrate, record themselves doing whatever it is that they need to do, sending it back to you. My students, my children use that all the time. My students, I have not engaged with them on that. Thank you, great contributions. So let's kind of wrap up because I know you're all very busy people. So with the last few minutes here, I want to just kind of go through and recap. UDL is not a checklist. So it's not like if you go through and you modify your assessments and you just say, okay, I've modified assessments, check. I'm giving them a presentation and a test, check. Oop, I've done UDL, I'm good to go. That's not how it works. It really works for you to look at UDL as how can you make modifications to everything in your instruction, everything in your engagement with your students to make yourself more accessible and to make them have that opportunity. Teach students how to learn, not just what to learn. That's really important, especially as we are in some variation of engagement with technology. Don't just tell them that things are on Google. Show them how to find those things on Google. Don't just tell them they have to be on a Zoom. Show them how to go and engage through Zoom. There's a lot of wonderful ways in which you can engage through technology, and I know many of you are doing these things, but think about that. The last thing we want to tell our students right now is, especially if we're all online, is just email me. We'll sort it out over email. We don't want to be doing that. We want to either have Zoom meetings with them or whatever platform you're using. I'm not biased to a platform. Zoom, GoTo, WebEx, Google, whatever format you're using, Teams. You can see them, you can engage with them, you can have them raise their hands. All the things that we've done to engage, you absolutely, I'm sure, are doing in your instruction to engage. But teach them how to learn, not just what to learn. And then UDL varies in every context, but small changes make a big difference. And so think about how you can take and use UDL in your daily routine, in what you do, but also think about ways in which you see UDL. So I love to bake. It is kind of my stress relief thing that I do. And it's apple season, so we have been baking apples and apple pies. But as you look at your peelers and you look at your mixers and all of those things, when you look at those, they're all are designed for ergonomics, which then is UDL. Look at your office chair. Look at the standing desk that some of you might have. All of those things are universal design. So again, I want to close kind of where I opened. Illinois' definition for universal design is an approach, scientific framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize those barriers. I want you to post in the chat this one last time here. What is a takeaway and what questions do you have? Does anybody have any questions? And did anybody have a takeaway from our brief time together today? Variation is the norm. Thank you. UDL is not a checklist. Awesome. Designing for the average is not good enough. It's just that if you design for the average, there is no average, so you're leaving someone behind. The barriers of excellent. So there was a question, is there any time frame that we can achieve that in our classroom? There really isn't a time frame, and I might not be understanding the question. It's just little things that you can do. So if they're like, let's look at your curriculum, and I'm happy to engage in conversation with you just one-on-one, but there's not a time frame of how long, because you could make a change tomorrow. So you could look at your curriculum if you are just a end of year comprehensive exam person, maybe we change that. Maybe you look and say, okay, I'm going to let them do a presentation. I'm going to let them do some research and present whatever topic we're teaching on. I'm going to let them do those things. Having a lab, have those labs graded. Or very simple things like next week, as you're looking at what you're going to do with your students next week, let them know on Monday what's coming up for the rest of the week. That's an easy thing to say, okay, because you plan out. I know you all plan out. Every teacher plans out. It's just how we go, right? I mean, it's ingrained in who we are. So you know what you're going to be teaching in the next week. Share that out with your students. That's a very woohoo check. I'm doing UDL. Other things you can do is when you're engaging with them online and in person, give them various ways to respond. That's universal design. You can post it in the question box. You can raise your hand if you're online. In the classroom, they can raise their hand, they can stand up. That's universal design. Or maybe they submit it on paper. You know your students, so you know there are individuals who really want to talk and who will dominate your classroom, right? You know those kids, you have them. You also know there are some wonderful little geniuses who don't really want to say a word in front of their friends, but you know they have potential and you know they know the content. So how can you give both of those students an opportunity to share what they have learned and share what they know? Just because a student is shy, we don't want to hold that as a barrier to them, correct? So how do we allow them to respond? Maybe it's a quiz, maybe it's an assignment, maybe they type in more. I know when I've taught hybrid, you can tell the students who are my robust talkers in the classroom, they still chat and are robust online, but so are my students who are more shy. So are my students who are more sit in the back of the room, trying to go through with being noticed but not being noticed. So think about those things. Think about meeting our students where they are. And yes, you do have this. I love that. I got this. Yeah, you got this. It's not rocket science, but it is something that you have to be intentional about delivering. So this last slide I want to show you is this is my center, Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. That is our website there. You can find me on there if you have any questions. Again, my name is Amy Julian. You can find the 2020 UDL series that casted. Those are all recorded and their handouts are up there. And then you can also find, we have all kinds of UDL series resources, I can't talk today, that I'd love to share with you. So with that, you will be getting an evaluation tomorrow. I do encourage you to please complete that to let us know how we're doing and what you want to see for the next time. We do have a 4-part series on UDL. And so each time we're going to dive a little deeper into what it looks like in the curriculum, what it looks like in the classroom, and how we can help you infuse UDL across your curriculum. So with that, I believe we have about 6 minutes left. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to hang on. Otherwise, have a wonderful afternoon. And please stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great day.